Hello, everyone. Very warm welcome to this webinar. We're very happy to present to you today a little bit more about the Gap Fund and what's new with the Gap Fund. My name is Theodora, and I'm the program manager for the Gap Fund, and I also have a patch in the Developmental Pathway Funding Scheme portfolio. I specifically work on devices, psychological interventions, and also imaging. And today with me on this call are my colleagues Florence and Sophie, and I'm going to quickly hand over to them for introductions. Florence, do you want to start?
Yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Florence, and I'm one of the program manager within the MRC Translation Research team. Within the team, I am responsible for the prevention of infectious disease portfolio within the Developmental Pathway Funding Scheme, and I'm also the experimental medicine panel lead. And I hand over to Sophie.
Yeah. Hi, morning everyone. I'm Sophie. I'm also a program manager in the translation team. My patch in DPFS looks after the advanced treatments related to cancer specifically, and I also help out on the experimental medicine scheme as well.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Yeah, without further ado, I'm going to talk about the Gap Fund for about 30 minutes, and then I'm going to open up the space for questions, and I really hope that this is going to be very useful for everyone. We're very happy to present the Gap Fund to you today. First, I'm going to start with a quick introduction to our translational funding landscape. At the MRC, our team is specifically focused on translation, but there is actually so much work happening in discovery research as well, as you all know, and it all feeds into translation. So we have a lot of opportunities coming from the research boards, from the fellowships, and also from other research councils. And then when science does get to the translation point, we have a lot of funding options. Firstly, we have our Developmental Pathway Funding Scheme, which is our flagship opportunity. We have around £33 million this year to fund projects that are ready for DPFS. Projects that are more focused on efficacy, so later stage clinical studies are then ready for our EME scheme, which has £4 million of funding for this year. And we also have experimental medicine, which focuses on clinical studies with a mechanistic mechanistic study intentions. We have £11 million for that. And on top of this, we have the Impact Acceleration Account opportunity, which is devolved funding, which is devolved to universities. So it's managed by each university, and it's available through the various offices at each research organization. And last but not least, today we're going to talk about the Gap Fund. The Gap Fund is a relatively new opportunity. Historically, it started because we noticed that a lot of projects were coming into DPFS without just missing a little bit of data, a little bit of support before they're ready for DPFS. So we created the Gap Fund with the idea that it can fill that initial gap, and it can prepare projects and de-risk them so that a larger investment can be made later on. So for this year, we have 2 more rounds left in September and in January, and we have £3 million for each of them to spend. So I have 2 quick slides to share the achievements to date with the Gap Fund. We do recognize it as a very valuable opportunity. We've seen a lot of feedback from applicants, from universities, from research offices as well. So we see the last 5 rounds of the Gap Fund since September is successful. We've received almost 600 applications. 82 of them have been funded, which is 14% success rate. The total financial demand to date is almost £130 million, and we've awarded 18 million. We've seen it very well geographically spread, both when it comes to applications that were submitted and also awarded applications. And we have long-term plans to maintain this opportunity, and it is currently a fixture within the translational funding landscape for MRC. When it comes to our portfolio, we have awarded a variety of projects. We do see demand, higher and rising demand in applications that have artificial intelligence as their main technology. We also see a lot of medical devices, but we've also funded a lot of cell therapies, gene therapies, imaging, repurpose studies, small molecules, vaccines. So it's a very rich portfolio, and we are very, very happy to see that demand coming to us. Another thing that we noticed is that the majority of the applications that we funded were very focused. They were usually shorter projects or projects that are just very much answering a single question. And that seemed to be more acceptable by the panel. And because of this, we decided to make some changes and make the Gap Fund slightly more focused on a single question. So we reduced the duration. It was 24 months. Now it's down to 18 months. We do ask you to request only the time that you genuinely need, but it's up to 18 months. The funding remains up to 300,000 full economic cost, because we do recognize that some projects are genuinely expensive, but again, we request that you only ask for the funding that you genuinely need. The remit is largely unchanged, but now we want to focus it on a single high-risk step within the developmental pathway. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in my next slides. And finally, we want you to know where your project is positioned within that developmental pathway. And we want you to know what funding opportunities exist around the Gap Fund as well. So when it comes to remit clarification, I have several slides and I really want to focus on that. As I said, we've now included a lot of information in the application form about what the Gap Fund is. So the Gap Fund, a successful Gap Fund application should include a genuine single inflection point. It should be about that gap on the developmental pathway that you want to address. That gap should be high risk. Of course, high risk of failure, but also high potential for success. You should have a balance between that risk and also prior data to support your idea. As I said, success and failure are both very valuable, and we do want to see that you are bold and you are asking for something ambitious. We also want to see projects that are reasonably costed. So we don't want to fund a financial gap. We want to see that you're asking for the money that you genuinely need, and that way we can fund more projects, of course. And finally, as I mentioned earlier, we want you to have a vision for patient benefit and how this will be achieved. I've included a few quotes from directly from the application form, just to kind of point you to kind of the wording that we're using. And I've also included a link for you to go and read more about this. Also, what I really want to highlight is what the Gap Fund is not. We don't see the Gap Fund as a traditional grant application. So that means that we don't want to see many work packages and milestones. We do want to see something that is focused. Also, we don't want to see it including incremental progress or bridging a financial gap. We want it to be costed towards what you genuinely need. And finally, the Gap Fund is not designed to fund projects that can be supported elsewhere. So fundamental exploratory research, which is funded by the MRC boards, clinical work that's mechanistic, which is funded by experimental medicine, early proof of concept data, which is funded by our IAAs. And there is a little bit of an exception here that I'll mention later. but largely the Gap Fund is not about early proof of concept data. And finally, if your project is sufficiently de-risked and you now want to work on product development that is within DPFS remit, it means that you're ready for DPFS, and we will encourage you to come and apply there. And to kind of illustrate this better, I have a few examples, kind of case studies about what we mean by single high-risk step. I'm going to start with several examples in our preclinical portfolio. Firstly, the first example is within the devices patch. Applicants wanted, in this case, to develop a next generation prototype. They had already a bench tested version, and they wanted to develop a manufacturable design that is more ready for clinical evaluation. The technical pathway was seen as clear with no significant risks or decision points anticipated. The team already had proof of concept data, and they wanted to do some standard engineering refinement and some regulatory work as well. So in this case, we did not see this as a high-risk project. We saw actually this project as ready for DPFS and something that could be added as a milestone 1 in DPFS and then expanded into a larger project, potentially even a clinical project. On the other hand, we've, for example, had other remit queries where the applicants, for example, wanted to develop their prototype medical device similarly to the previous applicants, but in this case, they had a problem with hardware synchronization, and this was preventing the further development of the device. And basically, they weren't sure if this device was viable because of this synchronization issue. So a success would have helped them prepare for clinical testing, and failure would just prevent further investment in this device. And in this case, we saw this as a high-risk, high-reward project. We saw it as clinically urgent, technically challenging, and we thought that it was in remit for the Gap Fund. So this is kind of the difference that we see between these otherwise similar projects. And here, while I'm talking about devices, I just want to make also a separate point about devices where there is a significant engineering part. We're very, very happy to see these kind of projects. In many cases, they have been funded by EPSRC prior to us, and we are very happy to kind of see them move closer to patient benefit. However, with projects like this, we really need to see clinical expertise added to the teams and serious clinical aspects discussed in the application. This really allows us to see that these projects are genuinely leaving the engineering space and are now becoming more translational. So I just wanted to make this point about devices. Going back to our case studies, I wanted to give a few more. So for example, in the advanced therapies space, I have 2 examples. For example, when applicants are looking for manufacturing to test manufacturing for gene therapies, that is something that we see as high risk, and we receive a lot of projects that want to work on this in preparation for phase 1 trials. So this is in remit for the Gap Fund. Other similar projects, for example, want to test multiple AAV serotypes before they choose the most appropriate one, and this helps them inform on dosing and manufacturing strategy as well. So we see these projects as well as in remit for the Gap Fund. In the biomarkers field, we receive a lot of projects that are asking to test a library and then find one biomarker hit. In this case, we see these projects as biomarker fishing, and we see them as a bit too early on their developmental pathway. We see them more as discovery projects. And we often advise that once applicants have a clear biomarker hit and they want to optimize that further, look for specificity, sensitivity, then they're more ready for the Gap Fund and DPFS. And finally, for example, in the small molecules field, we see hit expansion experiments as something that nicely fits the gap in the Gap Fund. So these are experiments that or projects that have a promising hit already, and now they want to study, basically create analogs of this hit and study it biochemically in more detail. And this is something that we see in remit for the Gap Fund. And finally, the Gap Fund is very much focused on preclinical work, mainly because we see clinical work as something a bit more expensive and going beyond our limits of 18 months and £300,000. But we do receive remit queries for clinical work, and we see that as something that can also fit within the gap. So I'll give you two examples of something that is in remit and something that isn't. So in this first case study, we had applicants coming to us that already had promising data funded by IAA. They had shown that their intervention was acceptable in a human cohort. They had some feasibility data, and they had also seen some good promising efficacy results. So now they just wanted to expand this data before they were fully ready to design a randomized controlled trial. In this case, we didn't see this as something critical, high risk. We actually saw this as something that fits DPFS quite nicely. It's a nice milestone 1 for DPFS. It is risky, it is needed, but it can well be mitigated by success criteria in DPFS, and then the next milestones can be easily used to design an RCT. So that is what we ended up deciding in the end. For another study, the applicants came to us asking again for a feasibility study. They were looking for recruitment, adherence, attrition rates, etc. They had a sample size of 30 participants, which was largely determined by consultation with clinicians and statistical experts. And the population that they wanted to test this intervention in was very heterogeneous and very complex. The intervention was also very complex, and the applicants felt like it was impossible for them to design a randomized control trial without this critical data as part of a DPFS. So in this case, we did think that the Gap Fund was something appropriate, and we did think that this word was in remit for the Gap Fund. And one note that I wanted to make when it comes to clinical work is that we do realize that sometimes these feasibility studies are more expensive or should last longer. So we really don't want you to design small studies or studies that are too short to be meaningful, just to fit the Gap Fund. And in these cases, DPFS is a better choice. And yeah, after this, I just want to spend a little bit of time addressing some other questions that we often receive. So what counts as a single step? That is a very common question. So a single work package may include several experiments, but it must be kind of united. These experiments must be united by a common goal rather than multiple goals. And if you do want to add several additional experiments, you should be able to justify how they're related to this united goal. Also, it's important that this single step is risky, as I've said before. If it is not that risky, it's potentially mitigated by success criteria setting in a DPFS application. Then maybe you are ready for DPFS. And now I have a few slides about the changes that we've made to the application form. This is how the application form looks. We've made small changes. We've included 4 additional sections that are relatively short. We've made the intellectual property section compulsory. and we've only made some cosmetic changes to the background and approach section where we really encourage you to use visual representation and data much more than lengthy text. These methods work much better with the panel and make it easier for the panel to evaluate your applications. So that's something that we encourage. And now I'm going to quickly focus on each of the new sections. The first one is the fit to funding opportunities section. Here we want you to talk about a few things that will kind of spark the interest of the panel and will kind of summarize your application in a very accessible way. So we have an elevator pitch question, which will ask you to summarize your application in a few impactful sentences. We're also asking what the gap is. So what is that high risk early step in development? We're also asking you to talk about how this is going to prepare you for substantive funding and also what you envision is the patient benefit and how you're going to reach that. We also have two sections that their main aim is to encourage you to engage with your university, with your tech transfer office and your translational research offices early, because this will help not only your gap fund application, but also your further applications. And we also really want you to know about the impact acceleration accounts funding opportunity, because we note that in many cases, academic applicants that come to us don't know about this opportunity. So for us, it's important to highlight that to you. And finally, the fourth section that we've added is about the artificial intelligence gap. We've defined what an artificial intelligence focused application is. So this is an application that uses AI as a core enabling technology and not merely an add-on feature. And we've added two question sections. The first one is about categorizing your application. If your application is focused on AI, you should be able to fit it within these four categories, which are the most common categories of projects that we receive, or you should be able to define it as a separate fifth category. And the purpose of this is to help both the panel and you as applicants to kind of understand the usual applications that we receive and what kind of the gap fund usually focuses on. The second section is once again aiming to set the tone. So it's four questions that are relatively short, and they're highlighting to you that what's important in a gap fund application focused on AI is for you to talk about data, methodology, expertise, and also what your success criteria are. So how are these criteria and achieving them are going to sufficiently de-risk your project. And finally, I have a few tips that I want to share with you about writing a good application. I have these 7 quick tips. The first one is once again highlighting the single high-risk step. We really want you to be able to put that in the context of the gap fund. Secondly, I wanted to mention that these applications are not peer-reviewed. They're reviewed by the DPFS panel and also a small supporting panel. So the reviewers will have relevant expertise, but they're not direct experts in your field. So this is why you need to write your application addressing it to a non-expert. And this is especially true for the fit to funding opportunity section. We want this to be addressed to a scientific generalist, so it can be very easily understandable and very easy access to what exactly you're focusing on. The third tip is to get the numbers right. We have rejected many applications that asked for 300,000 MRC contribution instead of 300,000 full economic cost. So please do make sure that you ask for full economic cost and also up to 18 months. The fourth tip is to assemble the right team. Clinicians, statisticians, always very important, and they will prepare you for a better DPFS application. Then again, for every translational project, it's important for you to know the pathway to impact. we do realize that this is an early project, so we don't want you to have a perfect plan, but it's important for you to know where you stand within this pathway. And this kind of leads nicely to the importance of you understanding your commercial opportunities and the options to commercialize your work. We know that some of these projects are not commercializable. For example, repurposed studies in many cases are not, and this is okay, but we want you to show and demonstrate that you've looked for potential. And we want you to consider all types of IP, including patents, know-how, data, copyright, trademarks, anything that can be generated by your work. And this is why we've made the IP section compulsory. And finally, seek support early. Many universities have very experienced research offices and tech transfer offices, so please do contact them. We are in frequent conversation with them. They know the translational space well, and they will prepare you for this application and later on for DPFS. I have here a quick timeline as well of the Gap Fund. Today, 16th of June, we have the webinar. On the 9th of June, of July, the applications will close. Then in July and August, we're going to do preliminary assessment. So we'll confirm the remit, and we'll also contact the panel and another group of experts that helps the panel. And then the panel meeting is on the 17th of September, so the results will be communicated shortly after. And in November, we'll aim to give feedback to all unsuccessful applicants, and also the deadline for the January round is going to close in November as well. I've also included a few links here that are very useful. We do receive a lot of questions, and most of the answers are potentially somewhere on the internet already, and this can save you some time and emailing. And finally, I would like to open space for questions. There is always the Gap Fund email address, so you can contact us. However, we do take some time before we respond, and bear that in mind. So contact us well in advance before the deadline. And I do want to mention once again that the Gap Fund is now a regular fixture within our translational funding space. So there are going to be rounds opening every 4 months. And we do encourage you to design the best application possible, because if the application fails, there is a 12-month moratorium after that. So with this, please do ask questions.
Thank you, Theodora. I think I'm going to try and chair the question session, so hopefully the Q&A is open to you all, and we've got plenty of time for questions. So yeah, please do pop them in the Q&A box, and we can work through them. But yeah, that was really clear presentation, Theodora. Well done. I don't know if we've enabled unmuting. Do you know, Theodora, if we've enabled unmuting, or is it chat questions in the chat in the Q&A only?
I think I can, I've enabled the mic, so it should work for Animesh.
Okay. Animesh, do you want to go ahead and say your question? If I pronounced that correctly.
And I can also see some questions in the Q&A section.
Yes. Yeah.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Quick question on medical device related gap funding. So if you are designing a medical device and you have had IAA funding and other related support from different types of grants, and you want to go ahead with the next step, want to do small animal studies, would that come in the gap funding if it is focused over 18 months? Because that's typically problem for regulatory process as well, because as you know, medical devices take long time to go through medical regulatory process.
Yeah, so in theory, this will be in something that the Gap Fund may fund. It's going to be a question of how you how you define your gap and how you define the risk of this experimental work, and the question that you're asking. It could also be a part of a DPFS application if you want to design a larger study, and if you see this preclinical work as something more less risky, something that is already de-risked, then it's DPFS. But if you have a clear question and an experiment that you want to test before you feel ready for DPFS, then that preclinical work for that device is likely to be in remit for the GAP fund.
Can I just expand this question a bit more? So if you have a medical device and that is being proven to work in a laboratory environment, but for animal studies, if you want to have a kind of a good laboratory practice integrated with medical device, because animal studies often require that requirement that good laboratory practice has been adopted. Would that be a one question or a two question?
It would be something that we will have to discuss separately, I would say. I should kind of mention that when it comes to a project that is more detailed, maybe we should discuss it separately from this webinar. So it's good for, in theory, it is within the remit of the GAP fund, but it's a question of how you define the gap and how you see that single step. So maybe we can have that conversation separately.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Theodora. Maybe we'll go to a question that's in the chat, in the Q&A function next. So question from Aaron. Would it be within scope for the GAP fund to position a project around the commercialization market research that aims to understand or validate the commercial viability of technologies developed for lower middle income populations? This would involve usability, acceptability, voice of customer analysis for the technology.
Yes, I would say that this is an remit for the GAP fund. It has to be focused on why this is important and why you see this as risky, necessary work before you qualify for DPFS. So if this is something that you can include in a larger DPFS project, then please do come into the DPFS for that. But if, for example, there is risk to do with the viability of this technology and whether it is commercializable, whether it can reach the market, or kind of, yeah, if you see it as something risky, then and if you can justify it that way, then please do come to the GAP fund for that work.
Great, thank you. We have a hand up from, sorry, forgive my pronunciation, Jianqi. I will enable your mic, so you should be able to unmute and ask your question now.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the useful talk. So it's just a very quick question on the website. It says that the GAP fund funding can be used to follow on from fundamental science funding across the whole of the UKRI remit, and then it includes lots of different boards, and then says also non-UKRI funding. So if there was funding from a kind of non-UK based, I think that our example is maybe like a Swiss or Swedish foundation for scientific research. Is that fine, or does it have to be kind of following on from some kind of UK funding?
No, that's absolutely fine. We don't have any requirements for where the funding before us came from. It's much more about data and the question that you want to ask. So absolutely fine if the funding came from somewhere else.
Brilliant, thank you.
There's lots of questions coming into the chat now. I don't know where Florence has gone, so are you happy to keep going, Theodora?
Yeah, absolutely.
So question about, do you encourage applicants to contact the MRC for a remit check before applying?
We do encourage it. It's good to have the conversation. Sometimes it can be a call, it can be an email exchange. What we usually want to say is that it takes us time to respond. So contact us in advance before the deadline. And also, if you haven't received a response within 2 weeks, feel free to follow up. We will come back to you. But yeah, it's good always to have that kind of conversation.
Yeah, I am here, Sophie. Sorry,
Oh,
I think
sorry.
you don't see. No, that's fine. That's fine. I was responding to these questions actually, and I would reinforce Theodora's point, saying that applicants are welcome to contact if they have specific questions about their project that they cannot resolve after talking to their research office and tech transfer office, who are there as well to support them and have a lot of experience with the Gap Fund going through the past 5 rounds.
Thanks. So sticking with the Q&A box at the moment, do we have any examples of successful biomarker studies that have been funded? I'm not sure of the answer to that one. Do you know?
Off the top of my mind right now, I can't remember a specific one, but we do have the biomarkers patch and we've had it over the past several years as a separate patch, and we do receive a lot of biomarker studies. So we have funded such studies before. They're just not in my specific patch, so I can't remember an example,
And
but for sure.
A thing to add is that all the after each panel, the applications awarded are published on the website, so you can refer yourself to that webpage and look at what type of studies have been funded.
Yep.
Thanks, Florence. Another question about fundable projects. So in previous Gap Fund rounds, were there any kind of scored fundable projects that we could not fund due to the kind of budget available? I think the answer is yes.
Yes. Yeah, we do receive a lot of applications, unfortunately, and well, very fortunately, actually, we're very happy to receive many. But we the way we score them is we usually have 8s and 9s that are fundable, and for the Gap Fund, we've only funded the 9s so far because of the high demand. That still means 14% success rate. So the success rate is good, but still the quality of the applications that we've awarded is very high. We will work to get a bit more funding in the future, but that is not currently the case. So, yeah.
Okay, perhaps we'll go to someone with their hand up. So, Humaira, go first. Do we need to enable your microphone? Okay, hopefully you'll be able to unmute.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you. Yeah, I've actually posted it in the as a question as well, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So does the Gap Fund cover proof of concept with feasibility testing of the product?
So this is something actually I should have mentioned. When it comes to proof of concept, we see this slightly earlier than the Gap Fund. And we usually kind of point people to impact acceleration accounts when they want to do proof of concept data. And if the university don't have an IAA award, then they can come to the Gap Fund for that proof of concept data. In terms of proof of concept that's specifically clinical, I think it will depend on your specific project, whether it comes to the Gap Fund or not. As I mentioned during the presentation, there are some studies that feel ready for DPFS even when they're doing feasibility work, and other studies that have a key question that they want to ask that are more focused and more ready for the Gap Fund. So it will depend on your specific study, and maybe you can email us separately about that, unless you have a unless you want to describe the project a little bit better and it's useful for the attendance today to discuss that.
Okay, I'll probably email you later on then. Thank you.
Okay, perfect.
Great. Thank you for your question. Thanks. And then next, Manohar, you've got your hand up. I think you should be able to unmute and ask your question.
Great, thank you. I was just trying to get a sense of what is considered risky within the high risk sort of wording that you have. And we're trying to integrate a bunch of sensors to measure some health measures, and there will be some risk. It's a difficult task, but it's an engineering task, but it's a difficult task. I'm not sure if that counts as risky or what the level of risk is considered risky.
Yeah, that's a very good question. Of course, there's nuance with this, and it's not perfect science. The way we see it is, if you can mitigate the risk as part of the Developmental Pathway Funding Scheme. So if you can introduce success criteria and you see this risk as something that is just an inherent part of research, then maybe it's not risky enough for the gap fund. With the gap fund, it's kind of risk of failure. These projects are quick yes or quick no. Both are valuable, both are interesting to know. And if you get a yes, then we can support a larger project and we can feel confident to invest in a larger project. If the answer is no, then that's great, because the study wasn't viable to start with. So this is kind of the yes-no dynamic that we're looking for the gap fund when it comes to risk.
Does that clarify your question?
Yeah.
Somewhat. Thank you so much. You have to think about this. Thank you.
I'll just go back to the Q&A box as well. So the next question is around remit for, does the gap fund cover AI-related sensor technology for social care settings?
Social care, definitely we do fund AI projects, sensor projects. I would kind of really want to know what you mean by social care in this case, and it's possible that it's within our remit, or it might be something that's more NHR, but it will depend on your project. And I don't know if maybe
the MRC remits need to have a human disease pathology focus to be within remit of the Medical Research Council. So like Theodora said, we would need to have perhaps a separate conversation on what is considered by social care.
Yeah, thank you. A question about IAAs in the Q&A. So are applications eligible if the host institution does have an MRC IAA, but the IAA is already fully allocated, i.e. there's no funds available? And yeah, if an earlier stage application is allowed because the MRC IAA is closed, what might happen if the funds are refreshed after the application deadline? I think go on, Theodora. I was just going to say, I think if your institution's IA is completely closed, new applications, then you can explain that in your gap fund, because we would similarly consider applications from institutions without an IAA. So I'd say yes, and I think if you've not been able to access IAA funding even after it's refreshed, but after you've submitted, then that would also be acceptable. If that helps with that one. Okay, another question from the Q&A. Is a patient-facing app development in scope if we have an early stage prototype that has been used for small-scale patient and clinician feedback, but we need to complete the software engineering to make it fully functional and enable more structured user testing and acceptability for deployment in the NHS?
Yeah, in theory, this is something that we would fund. It's within our remit. Once again, it's it has to be defined as a risky step, and a single question that you want to answer.
Great. Let's go back to the hands up. So Rachel, you should have your mic enabled to ask your question.
Thank you. That was actually also my question in the Q&A section that you'd asked, but I did actually have a quick follow-on one, if that's okay. When you say there's a moratorium on kind of reapplying, is that for the project as a whole, or could you potentially reapply for the project but with a different gap if you've kind of slightly further along in a different way?
So I would encourage you to contact us, and if we consider the project sufficiently different, and if we see that you've had that conversation with us in your application, then you can come back to us earlier, but it has to be sufficiently different.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful.
And Adam, you should be able to unmute yourself. What's your question?
Yeah, great. So this fund's approach seems really perfect for early startups, but I understand it's focused on research institutions. Can you speak to circumstances where a startup company could apply for this support to overcome a true gap, or what would need to be true? What partners would be needed? Am I totally off base?
So startup companies cannot apply for MRC funding. Innovate UK is a really good place for that. So only academics can be part of the core team for this and other MRC applications. So startup companies can be partners. And then they can be defined as partners, and the relationship between the academics and the partnering startup company will have to be defined and will have to comply with our subsidy control regulations. And I have included in the application, and the slides will be available after this, a link to our ICF, so Industry Collaboration Forum framework.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Theodora. Back to the Q&A then. Would the application be looked down on if it didn't have an IAA funded prior work?
No, absolutely not. Who funded the work prior to us is it's not something that we're trying to actively regulate. We're just, it's really a question of having enough proof of concept data before you come to us.
Great. A question, if your gap fund application is unsuccessful because the proposed project is more suitable for DPFS, do applicants have to wait 12 months before applying to DPFS?
I was just answering that one on the chat actually, and the answer is no, because we would expect that if your gap fund application has been deemed more within remit of the DPFS, then your DPFS application will be substantially different to the gap fund. The gap fund is to address, like Theodora said, a single goal, a single work package, and the DPFS is much more ambitious than that. It's usually multiple work package with at least 2 milestones to apply to the project. So you wouldn't need to wait that 12-month moratorium on the condition that it's a very different project.
And also with, if your application is rejected for remit reasons, it will be rejected very early on before it reaches the panel. So in that case, the moratorium wouldn't apply.
A question about, are there any examples of gap applications where salaries are not requested and the funding is used fully for a large animal study? Because overheads are prohibitive, but we have to include staff or else we won't have approved submission from the department.
Personally, I have not seen that. I'm not sure about you, Sophie or Theodora, but I think it will be more a matter of internal discussions with your research office, whether they will let you submit without any salaries and just on the conditions of large animal studies.
Yeah.
But then again, it's going back to the what is the remit of the gap fund? Is the large animal study a high risk single step study, or is it part of a bigger DPFS project?
Yeah, I think it's worth reminding everyone that the DPFS scheme does cover preclinical work. So yeah, if it's a large animal study that's kind of along the pathway that might be multiple work packages, it might already be eligible for DPFS rather than the gap fund. Question, I'm trying to see which one Florence has answered in the chat already. Would a gap fund application related to the development of an app that is used for speech and language intervention with an at-risk baby population be within the remit?
I think that sounds MRC remit. So it would be, again, high risk, single step.
Yeah. If a project is within the MRC IAA remit, but the funding available for an IAA is not enough, can they apply for the gap funding?
That's an interesting question. I would say if it is very early and there is no proof of concept data, then maybe it's better to look for funding elsewhere before you're ready for the gap fund, just because you're going to be more competitive once you have that data.
Great. Does the application volume in terms of the different deadlines change much between panels?
So far, we roughly receive around 100 applications every round, but we don't know how that's going to change in the future.
I will enable Ruben's mic for you to hopefully be able to ask your question. I can see you've got your hand up, Ruben.
Yes, thank you very much. That was very useful. I guess my question is about trying to get my head around what you would define as the main distinguishing factor between proof of concept and validation. Because especially when it comes to, you require data from patients, as an engineer, I just think I'm still validating my technology, but is that a proof of concept, or is it actually validation that is sufficient for, development for Gap Fund?
Yeah, I understand that there is nuance in wording. In this case, it's always more valuable to have a specific conversation about your specific project, especially if you're an engineer and your work's been ongoing for some time. It's possible that you still see it as proof of concept, but to us, that is something that's already developed well enough. So I would just encourage you to contact us.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
There's still a quick couple more questions in the chat. So please, could you expand a bit more on whether market research commercialization would be eligible or not? Would like to understand the definition of risk in this context, as it is not experimental research, and if this type of project would be considered for exploring new and novel translational routes or novel business models.
I think I see this question now slightly differently than I did the first time. I would say that if it's just that work and there isn't kind of a scientific question, then it's not in remit for the Gap Fund. There has to be a scientific question, and then the commercialization is separate. Is a part of that question. It's an important risk, especially if you can define it as an important risk. But if it's solely about that kind of more economic analysis, then that is not within our remit. And actually, it might be a good thing to include in a DPFS application, for example.
And then the last question I can see in the Q&A, we have developed a prototype for a medical app. During user experience testing, we were told that a specific enhancement could increase accessibility in hard-to-reach populations. Would Gap Fund cover the development and testing of this app enhancement, which would use AI?
I would say well, it's difficult because, again, it's potentially something worth having a separate conversation about. It does sound like an inflection point. So, but Florence, feel free to.
I was just thinking, if you already have tested, if you already have your prototype developed and your app, it's you as the expert of the work into whether it's just an improvement, an optimization of the app you already have to include that hard to reach populations, which could be then included into DPFS, because it's a risk that is there, it exists. DPFS projects are inherently risky, but they can be mitigated by a robust risk management plan. So is this risk manageable, or is this a fast fail? Is this 50%? It's a random figure here, but does it have a high risk to not go any further?
Yeah.
And then that's the Gap Fund. That's how we would see it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think if it's incremental improvements, that would probably align more with a larger DPFS grant than a Gap Fund. Would a couple more questions have come in? We've got a few minutes still. Would a 1.5-year clinical trial on validation of a biomarker be in line with Gap Fund remit?
On the validation, sorry, can you say
on validation of a novel biomarker, an 18-month clinical trial on validation of a novel biomarker be in line with Gap Fund remit?
I think in this case, the question that I kind of want to ask is, would this fit within the £300,000 limit? Because our experience is that these studies are a bit more expensive than that, and also require setup and several milestones for them to be de-risked enough and competitive. So I think that is my initial thought.
Yeah, I think as you said in your presentation, we have some success with some early feasibility studies, but we don't tend to see clinical trials in the Gap Fund because of the cost. And it's perhaps more gated throughout the whole clinical trial than a single step. Florence, did you want to add something there?
Well, I don't know if that person is still there, but perhaps they could clarify, but because it seems that the clinical trial is about to start. So I don't know if it's funded through a separate means, and then it's to do some retrospective sample analysis, which I don't think will be within the Gap Fund, because it has to be linked to development, intervention development. So yeah.
I can see they said they can speak to it. If you can raise your hand, I can unmute you. Thank you. There's a very long list of people otherwise to try and find your name. There we go.
Okay, hello. So this is we are trying to set up this study for some years, and it's about to start the clinical trial, and it will be self-funded per each of the institutes, and it's an international validation study that will have up to 150 patients. So in terms of the costing, the idea is that it would cost mainly my salary and visits to the center so that they are doing the analysis as it should be done. And that's basically it. Would that still fit or not really? For your knowledge, I had an Impact Accelerator Award granted, so, which currently finances me.
I think I would go back. I think I would go back to what Theodora said, mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, that the Gap Fund is not a financial bridge.
Yeah, of course,
and
of course.
It has to really fit within a pathway for the development of the intervention. So what would make you think that, because you're at the validation stage of the biomarkers, is it high risk validation stage, or is
Yes, I would say so, because our proof of concept is specific of a single disease. Now we want to apply to a panoply of diseases. It might not work so well. We will improve the method as we are analyzing more patients from different diseases. So it's definitely not a product about to be out there.
Okay.
I would still say that it sounds to me more like bridging financially the project that you already have, and it potentially is not within the remit of the Gap Fund, at least the way I hear it right now.
Okay.
Yeah, perhaps a separate conversation. If you still want some more clarification, I would say. So with that, it is 12 o'clock. There was one very quick question about when the grant would start, and I'm interpreting that as when you can start. So the next round panel decision will be in September, as Theodora said, and then your project should start within 6 months if you're successful, as it is for all MRC applications. I hope that's what you meant by that. And yeah, with that, I'd hand over to Theodora to close.
Thank you very much, Sophie. Yeah, I'm hoping that this was a very useful session for all of you, and also an introduction to all of you to us. We are available to answer questions, and we really do want to create a community and this kind of ongoing discussion. And yeah, we hope that your future applications will be productive, successful, and wishing you all the best. Thank you.
Thank you very much.